Right, good afternoon and welcome to our live session. My name is Gavin Cass. I work for the School Improvement Service Square here in North Wales. As I said, we are live, so please be patient with us if we have any technical difficulties, but we will do our best. We are delighted to be facilitating this session in partnership with One World and the UNFCCC this afternoon. We aim to give you practical actions you can take to start the journey to be climate neutral now. We all know about the climate crisis, but do we know how we can make a difference? Bill Gates is quoted as saying recently in his new book, "It's possible to solve the climate crisis, but it will be the most important and amazing thing mankind has ever done." This session is the first in a series, and we'll have colleagues from China, Mexico, and the US also working on this to take part in a 100-school challenge, which was launched by One World. So we're aiming to get 100 schools across Wales to make the pledge and to take action to become climate neutral. It gives me great pleasure this afternoon to introduce Miguel and Fernanda from the UNFCCC, and they'll explain more about what you can do to take action. We do have a chat facility available, so if you are logged into YouTube, you make full use of that. Let us know you're listening, let us know you're there, and any questions we can facilitate through that. For our Welsh educators, you can log into that using your Hub account. So if you could do that, that would be fantastic. So without further ado, I will hand over to Miguel.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. A pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to have an interaction, at least at a distance, with you. I hope everyone is doing safe and well. So as Gavin introduced, the idea for this, the goal for this webinar is to help you as staff working in schools in understanding what is necessary to achieve this status that is called carbon neutrality or climate neutrality, how it works in practice, and how we can support you as well to get there in collaboration with One World and GWE at or as part of this 100 carbon neutral schools challenge. So the challenge is on for Wales to be the first region to achieve these 100 schools. So let me share the screen so we can share some of the principles, the steps and the principles to move towards carbon neutrality. I go to full screen and swap here. And if you can confirm, Gavin, that you can see properly, we get started. Can you see the screen adequately?
Yeah, we can see it, Miguel. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So we have a little bit of an agenda here. It's not as much as it seems. You will see that the process is relatively easy to go through once you know the principles. But we're going to be looking at how you measure or how you estimate the emissions of greenhouse gases, the gases that cause global warming, at your school. We have a calculator, which is a simplified calculator to help organizations estimate that footprint. And my colleague Fernanda is going to show you how it's used. We will have space, of course, for questions about that. We will also refer to how to reduce those emissions once you measured or once you estimated what the emissions are, what you can do to try to reduce. And finally, the compensation of the emissions that we were not able to avoid, to reduce, which we call contribution. So we will also look a little bit at that, at compensation or offsetting, as it's also known. And of course, we're going to hear also from a couple of schools from your region on their own experience so far in sustainability and on this track to carbon or climate neutrality. Good, so let's go with the first topic. The first one is measurement, or how to estimate the emissions that your school produces. And of course, you can apply the same principles to your home, to your personal life. It's the same principles for everything. What changes is the scope of what you're going to include. So before we go properly into the calculations, I thought I would give you an introduction to these concepts of carbon neutral, climate neutral, net zero, etc. And the first thing to say is there is no generic agreement or global agreement on what the different terms mean. Different stakeholders, different people use them with different meaning. So if at some point you get confused when you hear I'm carbon neutral or I aim to be net zero or something like this, don't worry. The majority of us can get confused about what that actually means. But it seems that the current understanding is the following, or the understanding that is emerging is the following. When you say I'm carbon neutral, and this is about, for example, the 100 carbon neutral schools challenge, it means that you are estimating your emissions, you are acting to reduce them, and then you offset with carbon credits, the type of carbon credits that we have today. Mm-hmm. Now, organizations like your school can be then carbon neutral, right? Because you can measure, reduce, and offset. The planet, however, cannot do that. Right? We don't have anyone to offset with. We have to reduce emissions in this planet, obviously. So carbon neutral is a very good concept to invite organizations to reduce their climate footprint, their carbon footprint. But at the level of the planet, it's not going to work. So what we need at the level of the planet is the concept of climate neutral or net zero. At least the way we currently understand it is they are synonyms. And it means you also estimate your emissions, you try to reduce them, but then you're going to compensate what you did not avoid by capturing it. So it's you have to actually capture it at the point where the emission is generated or extracting it from the atmosphere so that the atmosphere really doesn't have any more increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases. And we need to get to this status of global climate neutrality or global net zero by 2050. This is part of the Paris Agreement goals, and it's the only way that we are going to achieve the Paris Agreement goals, including limiting the level of warming. Just to give you a little bit of idea about the level of this challenge, 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic saw a reduction of between 6 and 7% of emissions globally. In order to be climate neutral by 2050, as the Paris Agreement demands, we need to see the same level of reduction of emissions every year from now on. That's the level of the challenge. We need a pandemic level reduction of emissions from now on every year. So we're inviting you to help us in achieving that. Good. If I go to the next. Okay, how do we estimate the emissions for your school or for anything else? The best tool that is out there right now is called the GAG Corporate Accounting and Reporting, the GAG Protocol Corporate Accounting and Reporting Standard. It is the most widely used methodology to estimate the footprint of an organization. So our calculator, our simplified calculator, is referring to this standard, is using this one as a basis. And then you not only need to follow a methodology to estimate the emissions, but you also need what are called emission factors, that they tell you how much greenhouse gases are produced by any activity, you know, the food that you buy, the car that you drive, the plane that you fly in. So these emission factors are required for the calculation. And we are using DEFRA, which is very convenient for you because they are UK specific. And we're using DEFRA not only because we like the UK, but because it is one of the most complete databases of emission factors for all kinds of activities that exist currently. So we use DEFRA as a reference. Once again, very useful for you because it will be more appropriate for you. It would not be so appropriate, for example, for the colleagues in Mexico or the colleagues in China with whom we're also going to be working. Now, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol classifies the emissions of an organization in three types: Scope 1, Scope 2, and 3. Scope 1 is your direct emissions, meaning the emissions that you're fully responsible for. For example, you own a car and you drive it, that's a Scope 1. You have an electricity generator in your school, or you're burning some fuel to generate heating for your school, That is scope 1. Scope 2 is the energy that you buy. Electricity, heating, cooling. In the case of industries, also steam. I doubt that schools are buying steam. But the electricity, heating, or cooling that you're buying from someone else is producing it, and you are buying it and using it, that's scope 2. And scope 3 is everything else that you could ever think of. It's the food that you use, the water that you drink and that you use for cleaning. It's the transportation of the students, the transportation of the faculty. It's the travel that you make for business purposes. It's the waste that you generate. Everything else that doesn't fall under the previous 2 calculations. So usually scope 3 is the biggest for all of us. The biggest and the most difficult to estimate. So, with those principles, do we have Fernanda on board? If not, let me go into the demonstration of the calculator.
Yeah, I'm here.
Fernanda, welcome.
Thanks. So thank you very much, Miguel, and thank everybody for watching today. I think it's wonderful that we have schools on board helping us to achieve climate action. So as Miguel said, I'm going to show you today our calculator. So it's an Excel calculator that we built to help the schools in this process of estimating emissions. So I also brought today a practical case, so you can see how you find your information, how you input the information in the calculator. And just after that, you have, I think, 10-15 minutes to discuss a little bit. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer that ones. So I share here my screen, and we start with the someone could confirm if you can see it.
I cannot, not yet.
Nope. No?
Now yes.
Okay, that's great. So I know sometimes when someone sees this calculator for the first time, it can look a little bit complicated. But as we navigate here in the tabs, you're going to be that's not that bad. So first thing here in the calculator, it's to add your information, the information about your school. Also important to add here the country, because we have some calculations that they are different for different countries. And here the reporting year, when some organizations, some NGOs, company, they report in a calendar year. From our experience, the schools, they prefer to report like the school year. So usually here in Europe, I think it's September one year to September another year. So I also want to show you some of the categories that you have here. We don't have time to go through all of them because we have limited time today, but they all follow the same or similar structure. So it should be, when you see one, understand one, it should be easy to go through the others as well. So the calculator always has here the category that you working on. So it's the same that you have here in the tab. So there is this instruction on how to input your data. We also have here the type. In this case, we're talking about waste disposal. So we have different types of waste. So when you have the practical case, we're going a little bit in detail how you can estimate this weight here. So, and then the calculator, as Miguel mentioned before, there are the emission factors. So these ones, they are fixed. They come from the some governmental sources, so we don't have to change anything here. And you have also to mind here the unit. Sometimes here in this case, it's in tons, but for example, for transportation, it can be in kilometers. For electricity, it's going to be kilowatts hour. So have to mind always here the unit. And you're going to see that other than the white cells here, you can't change anything else. So that's the way you guarantee that you know exactly where you need to put the information. So, and then here, as you add your data, so for example, if you had the organic food waste 1 ton in this year, and then the calculations come here automatically. So, and then as you, of course, here we are very comprehensive with many type of waste, but you should use only those that are applicable for your condition, so for your school in this case. So you don't have to fill all the cells. You just see here the most common for you. So for example, if you have paper, plastic, and so on. So it's the same idea for electricity. So you just have to input here the electricity consumption for this year that you're reporting. And the country is coming here from when you chose the country in the beginning. So as you do this for all of the tabs, so in the end, you're going to have a summary report like this. So it's 1 page, and then you have an overview here of all categories that you use there. And your total emissions, that's going to be used as the basis for your contribution. That's the step that Miguel will also talk later more in detail. So from here, let's have a look then in this practical case that then you see for some categories how you get the information and how you input into the calculator. So the first example here is electricity. So that one, it's quite direct. So you have to see the bill. So probably your administration or financial or operation manager, they have access to this bill. So here you have the consumption in kilowatts hour. So if you have a monthly bill, you just sum all month. And then here in the calculator, you just add the total consumption in the year. Sometimes some countries, they have like a yearly bill, so it varies a little bit, but if not, it would just sum all of them. So for heating and water consumptions, it's similar logic. So you just have your bill and then you add the data here based on these bills. Another example, it's material use. So as you can see here, I didn't fill all of them. So in this case, I used the example of an electrical item. So I bought a fridge. This information about weight I found on internet for this product. So as the input here is in tons, so I just divide the weight of the fridge per 1,000, and then I input the result just here. Another example, if you use 10 boxes of A4 paper, so also I found this information on internet. So 1 box, it's around 12 kilos, so times 10 boxes. So you have the total weight, and then divided by 1,000, and then you have the entry in tons. So you just put it here. Same principle for waste. So in this case, I use also the paper. So if you disposed 200 kilograms of paper in the reporting year, so you divide 1,000 and then you input just the total in tons here. So you always get questions about the waste. Of course, you're not expecting the schools to weigh the waste before they dispose it. So, but it's just to create this awareness. So if, for example, you have your bins with different sizes, you know, like, for example, every week or every 2 weeks, we have one bin of 100 liters. So you know how much it should be equivalent in kilograms. So we have for general waste, and for paper, plastic, or recyclables, you also have an estimation here. That's from the US Environmental Agency. So you can share the presentation afterwards, and then you can use this as a reference as well. One question also that you always have, why I have to, if I add already the material, in this case the paper, in the material use emissions, should I also add it in the waste disposal? So just to show the life cycle of the paper, for example. So in material use, we're talking about the emissions from the cutting the tree until you use it. And then when you talk about the waste disposal, then there are the emissions from the moment you use it, where you put it in the bin, and when it comes either to the recycling or to the landfill. So that's why even, for example, the same paper that you input here in the material use, you also input maybe later in the waste disposal. One last example here is for food. So we have here, if you have, for example, 50 students, you serve breakfast and lunch, and then you have your school years. So just to show how would you calculate how many meals in breakfast you're serving in the reporting year. So, and then you add just the total for the year here. As Miguel mentioned, food is the scope 3. So it's not mandatory to calculate, but it's, of course, nice if you can include it in your calculation as well. And as you use the calculator, I mentioned before, right, I showed, so this report is automatically generated. So you can have your full picture here in one page. Yeah, so maybe go back now to...
That was great. Thank you, Fernanda. A couple of questions that we've got coming through now is around what support is available to schools to help collect this information, because it looks like quite a lot from the presentation you've just given. So do they contact you? Do they, how do we support them through that?
Yeah, so we have our team, a small team, so but we're happy to support as much as we can. We also have some partners that help also schools in this process. And we try as much as we can also to provide the guidelines on the use of the calculator. You're also planning to make some video guidelines to help a little bit this process as well. Miguel, you want to add something?
No, thanks, Fernanda. I think you can reach out directly to us. We'll try to help you as much as we can. But I think once you start playing with the calculator, you will see it's not as complex as it looks.
That's great, thank you. And then the next one that's come through is, what happens if we can't collect all of the information required?
If I may take that one, the idea is you should try to get the main sources of emissions that the school has. And then little by little, year after year, because we would invite you to continue doing this into the future. Year after year, you can improve, you can add additional sources, additional points. But I would say focus on the scopes 1 and 2 that you will have there, or the easiest things. But usually that means electricity consumption, water consumption, any travel that you do for business. Usually you know how many flights, how many trains you take. That should be easy. And maybe the food. This is scope 3 actually. but the food may be also easy to calculate. So start with the things that you have more readily access to the information. And then little by little, once you get familiar with how the calculation is done, you can improve and grow the calculation.
Thank you. And then the last one, just for now, it's around how accurate do the measurements need to be? So I think some of our schools are thinking that the young people will be involved in these measurements. So do they need to be exact, or can they be a little bit flexible?
So I take this one, but Fernanda, you jump in if you want to add. You know that in everything that is related to calculations, how you say it in English, if you put in trash, you get out trash, right? Maybe the easiest answer for me is to say, try to get the best information possible. In the case of consumption of electricity, consumption of water, your trips, the amount of meals that you're serving, it should be quite easy to get the exact information, right? Because you can get that from your bills, you can get that from your travel agency or your financial, the person that is in charge of your finance, from your caterer. So that should be quite easy. But for example, areas like waste, how much waste did we generate? Are we going to have a balance outside of the school to weight every different type of waste? Probably not, huh? So you do need, if you want to calculate waste, you will need to do some estimations, some rule of thumb, how much it goes in each container or whatever. So yes, it is perfectly okay to do estimations. Just try to get the exact data when possible, and when not, note which assumptions you made. That's a good practice. If you have to estimate how much paper you consumed or you threw away, note down, this is how we estimated it, and write it somewhere, document it somewhere.
That's perfect. Thank you. That's it for the questions at the moment. So Miguel, I think that's over to you for the next steps around reduction.
All right, thank you. So we don't have Rob for his intervention right now.
We're working on a video, so we'll have that later on, hopefully.
No problem. So I go back to sharing the presentation here. And I go to full screen. Swap over here. Good. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong presentation. This is the Fernanda's presentation. My apologies. Now I cannot find my presentation here. Share screen. Perfect. Now it's working. All right. Good. So that was about the calculations. As we said, it might seem a little bit daunting when you open the Excel file and see so many options. But again, it is not required to fill every single cell where you could include information. Fill only those that are relevant to you, relevant to your school, and where you can get the data. Ideally, year after year, you will be improving on the data collection, and you maybe can calculate new things. The important thing is to get started in the process. Good. Now that we saw the calculator and had the Q&A, the next, as Gavin said, is reduce, right? Now that we know how much we are emitting and what are the sources of our emissions of greenhouse gases, how do we reduce those? So if we go back to that concept of scopes of emissions, types of emissions, the scope 1, again, are those emissions that you have full control of, about. It's the cars that you own and you drive. It's then maybe the electricity that you generate on site in the school by burning some fossil fuels, things like this. These ones you have, in principle, full control on. So this may be the easiest to look at for reducing emissions in the first place. Look at efficiencies in the generation of electricity. Look at options to drive less. The different actions that you could take to reduce emissions in those sources that you own. that are under your control. For the scope 2, and remember in the report, in the calculator, you are told which ones are which. You're told which ones are scope 1, 2, and 3. So you don't need to memorize it. You can just look at the report page of the calculator and you will see. So for scope 2, again, is the energy that you are buying from someone else, usually electricity, but maybe also heating and cooling. So in this case, what is important is to be efficient. We need to try to use that energy in the most efficient way. So things like turn off the lights, turn off the heating if possible, or the cooling for those places where there is cooling. Change to efficient lighting, change to efficient equipment, right? The computers and kitchens, anything that consumes electricity. Look for the most efficient equipment available. If this is not only good for the environment and to reduce your footprint, but usually comes also with a benefit, economic benefit, that reduces cost. So things like this. And finally, the scope 3 is emissions that you can only influence. They are not completely up to you. You depend on others to help reduce them or avoid them. So they are a little bit more complicated, but still very important because they are usually our biggest emissions, scope 3. So from looking at this list, you can see what it means. Try to fly less, right? Try to use, instead of flying, other means of transportation. Try to consume less water. Try to consume less of all materials. Less paper, less disposable items in the kitchens, in the cafeterias. So less consumption of all kinds of materials, and less waste of food. Right? The food waste is an important topic these days. We waste more than a third of all food that we produce globally. We could be feeding almost anyone on the planet with that waste. So we need to reduce the consumption of, the wastage of food. So things like this you can do. But then to be able to get there, there is a recommended process. And this is, of course, very formal. In your school, you may want to start a project or some collaboration with management to do something like this, or you may want to keep it more informal. It's up to you, of course. But if you want to go very formal about addressing the missions of the school, these steps here are the basic. And it's the basic of environmental management in general. You have to commit from the top level of the school to addressing your carbon footprint, right? This means the school director or the board of the school, they have to commit to making the resources available to try to reduce the emissions of the school as much as possible. Then you do the calculation of your footprint, which we already saw. You identify how to reduce it, and we already saw. And then you start tracking your progress. And this is where the beautiful side, let's say, the encouragement comes from the possibility of looking or seeing year after year how you reduce emissions, even if it's just a little bit. So you choose usually the first year as the basis for comparison for future ones. Although, if you're going to be including more and more sources with time, of course, the inventory is probably not going to reduce, but increase. But anyway, that's a different conversation. Ideally, you would choose 1 year as the base to compare in the future. And we can discuss how to do that if you don't do the whole calculation from the beginning. There are ways to do it. Then you may want to set a target, right, for management and for everyone to have a motivation and to have a clear goal in the future, either short term or longer term or both. But set a target, set an ambition. Then decide if you want to use offsets, carbon credits, right, to compensate for your emissions. Our recommendation is, if you have the resources, do it, because it's an additional way to encourage emission reductions around the globe. In the end, the planet, the atmosphere, doesn't care where the emissions happen or where the emissions are avoided. We are all going to experience that effect anyway. So using offsets to encourage others to reduce emissions is useful, is valuable. And then, of course, implement your strategy to try to reach your target, and keep track of your progress, reviewing, adjusting as time goes by, as you learn more, as you get more familiar with this process, and start from the top again. This, as all management processes, this is supposed to be a continuous process of improvement. Good, and this slide is here just for you to have as reference. The presentation will be made available to you, but these are some maybe obvious but important actions, some of which I already mentioned, to reduce the different sources of emissions that you saw. Be more efficient in the use of resources, right? Consume less. Be more efficient in the use of energy. We already discussed that: electricity, heating, cooling, for those that have cooling. And then the other point that I didn't mention before is work with your community. We are only going to be able to achieve targets to reduce in the school or targets to reduce in the planet if we don't collaborate. Only through collaboration it will be possible to reduce. So it is very important, of course, to continue working, because I'm sure you already are, continue working with your students, with your staff, to raise awareness about the importance of action on climate and sustainability in general. Maybe establish programs or projects, community service projects related to this topic. And eventually, for those who want to go more formally, like with the previous process, some process of internal auditing as well. Are we really doing what we aimed to do? Are we really moving forward? Is there really someone responsible for making sure that this is happening, etc.? But this again is for those that want to go more formal into a process of reducing emissions. And that's it. I think I go straight into the last step of compensating, and then we have another Q&A session. So let me go into the next topic. So now that you have calculated your carbon footprint or greenhouse gas inventory, you can hear both names, and you have analyzed how you can reduce, and you try to reduce those emissions, that footprint. The next step is what happens with the emissions that I was not able to avoid, or right, the things that I cannot reduce right now. Well, one option, as we were saying, is using carbon credits, or offsets as they are also known, to compensate for those emissions. So for this, we are talking about carbon markets. You may have heard about the term carbon markets. The European Union has one. The UK is going to continue with its own. So you probably have heard about it. And it refers to the trading of carbon credits or emission allowances between entities that are trying to reduce their emissions. The final goal of the carbon markets is to push for emission reductions, and they do so in different ways. We can get into the details. But in the end, these carbon markets are generating carbon credits or offsets. One carbon credit or offset is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. So all gases or greenhouse gases are compared to CO2. That's why we use the term CO2 equivalent. And one carbon credit is one ton of CO2. And then these carbon credits can be used voluntarily by individuals, by companies, by schools, to compensate for these emissions that they didn't avoid. The benefit is not only encouraging reduction or avoidance of emissions, but also there are co-benefits like generation of jobs, a reduction of pollution, improved access to energy and water, depending on the types of projects. So the projects that reduce emissions not only have that benefit, but also other social and environmental co-benefits, which is an additional reason to support them. In a very, very simple, it's a very simple way to explain how these carbon credits are generated. Usually the projects that generate carbon credits, they are reducing or avoiding emissions, right? So the line on the top indicates what are the emissions that would have happened with no project, if there was no project. And you have a certain level of emissions, and this can be generation of electricity, disposal of waste, any kind of project. The CDM, which is currently the system that generates credits under the Climate Change Convention, the CDM has over 200 different types of projects that you can do. So whatever the project, there are going to be some emissions estimated if the project didn't happen. Then you implement the project and those emissions are going to be lower. The difference between the projected emissions that would have happened and the emissions that actually happened is the amount of reductions that you achieved and the number of credits that you are going to get. In the case of the CDM, they are called CERs. That's why you see it here. But the credits can have different names depending on the system that you're using to certify the project. But this is the general concept. You estimate what the emissions were going to be without the project, calculate with the project, and the difference you get in carbon credits. As I was saying, there are many different types of projects in the CDM, more than 200 of them, from bike sharing to electric motors for airplanes when they are taxiing, so that they turn off the engines and use the electric motor charged with renewable energy, hopefully. From rapid bus transit for cities to generation of biogas or efficient cook stoves for low-income communities, from solar water heaters to proper management of manure, all kinds of projects, in addition to your typical renewable energy or reforestation, afforestation projects. So there are many, many different types of projects. The important thing is they have to be certified. And sorry, before I finish this, the important thing is that the carbon credits come from a system that ensures that the projects are verified, that they are actually reducing emissions, and that those emission reductions go beyond business as usual. So, for example, if a big city was planning to develop a rapid bus transport system like this one here, as part of their strategy for managing traffic in the city, it cannot receive carbon credits because the government was anyway going to do it. If the airplane here is planning to install electric motors because it is cheaper than using their engines, it cannot receive carbon credits because it's going to happen anyway. The projects need to be an extra effort to reduce. So thanks to the extra income that the project is going to get from selling the carbon credits, the project becomes financially attractive. And so without carbon credits, project is not attractive. With carbon credit, a project becomes attractive. That is the key criteria, and there is a whole process to assess if the projects are really an extra effort or not. And this is what you support when you purchase some carbon credits to compensate for emissions voluntarily. Good, I leave it there for now. And I wonder if we have Rob or if we have the other colleague to help us with sharing from the schools.
Yeah. Thanks for going. We're going to do Tabitha. So we're really thankful this afternoon. Tabitha, who's the head teacher at Pen y Bryn, is going to share her experience of how they followed this process. So thanks, Tabitha. Over to you.
Thank you, Gavin. Well, first and foremost, I can say that Miguel and Fernanda are very supportive. We did the process last year around January time, so pre-pandemic, and it was really quite straightforward. It has actually increased the lines that you have there now, Miguel, but as you say, that's doable because we've done it before and we can build on that. We sent the information off. It wasn't automatic then. We sent it, I think I sent it to Fernanda and I got it back within 24 hours. And from there, looking at how we could look at, as you say, a management point of view, and also making sure that we've got the pupil voice included right the way through. So on a management point, it's things such as LED lights to be phased in, which we've got a plan for that. And for the pupils, it was to use the Eco Club. And I have to say, then the pandemic hit. So it wasn't quite easy to do because we didn't have it defined. It was all skewed due to not having as many children in, or not using as much heating, etc., etc. But they were aware of the project that we wanted to do before the pandemic hit, and they were very involved with the CER process. So we did a shortlisting per year group, and then we did a vote across the school to vote for the CER and what we would offset our carbon emissions from. The children learnt a lot from that about renewable energy, and we're really fired up then to make a difference in school as well. So we've kept hold of that, and we're redoing our assessment this year. And I have an excellent teacher who steers the eco club that we have. I'm not just saying that because she's online at the moment as well, but she is excellent, and she's organised an eco week to set this off now. And with the 9 topics in eco club, she's going to give each year group a certain topic, and then they will see how they can reduce that particular admission in the school. So it could be waste, it could be transport, and then we'll go from there, and that will give us that real emphasis then. Now we've got all the children back in the school to really get our admissions down. I would strongly recommend it because it really does open up a lot of opportunities for pupil voice and additional learning.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tabitha. I know you're really busy, so we do appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing your experience. We've also got Rob, who's the head teacher at Boris in Wrexham, but he's having a few technical issues, so he's done us a video. So we're going to try and play his video now. So fingers crossed it will work. If not, we will skip to the next section. So we will just see now.
Hi, Rob Nicholson here from Boris Park Primary School in Wrexham. Just a quick hit really to say that we've done in the past the carbon neutral exercise, and must say how simple it is to do. We first of all worked via One World and got the contact with Miguel in the UN to get us started, who gave us an Excel spreadsheet with everything we needed to know to guide us through the process, and it was absolutely simple, and it really is pupil led as well, which is even better. I had to do very little. First of all, energy consumption, email the local authority. They'll give you your energy consumption for the school in kilowatts per hour, and then that's translated then via Miguel and the support there to how much carbon dioxide is in tons is generated by your school. Children in my One World Club, the Agents of Change, they canvassed the junior department staff, teachers, to see how far they drove in a year. So it was basically their journey. They did the maths on it themselves. They did the journey to and from work, times it by 195 school days, and that gave then the journey miles per teacher. And that again was converted into tons of carbon dioxide used. Also, I had a flight to the United States as well to join with the One World conference. That was also, they stung me on that one as well, the pupils. They got that on the list as well. So that equated in my school to 87.2 tons of carbon dioxide. We then had to, I gave that to the Eco Committee then, who had to do plan a fundraising activity, which we did blue bag recycled reused clothes. They raised £250 for the school, which they generated then on offsetting the carbon footprint that we'd created via the Climate Neutral Now website. And they decided themselves, the pupils decided to invest in 3 schemes in India: renewable energies, 1 solar water heating, waste heat recovery projects, and wind power projects also in India. And they bought so many units of there, and that was us offsetting the carbon that we used. And then we had a plan to reduce the amount of carbon we used in the first place. So sorry I can't be there live, but I hope this reaches you well. Thank you.
So hopefully the message is loud and clear from both our head teachers there, that this is a pupil-led initiative. They're involving the pupils at every level. It's giving that real pupil voice, and they're making the decisions on how they're improving for their school. So we thought it was important that you heard from head teachers to show how this works back in your schools. So Miguel, it's back to you if you've got any closing statements or anything you want to finish off with.
Thank you. Before that, I was wondering if there are any other questions. We have time for that.
Yeah, there are no questions coming through at the moment, Miguel.
Okay, excellent. So I think what scared more the colleagues who are on the other side of the screen is the calculation bit. The reduction and the compensation seems to be quite straightforward or well understood, which is great. In any case, any questions that come afterwards, either through Gavin or directly to us, we'll be happy to support as much as we can. No, in terms of closing, that's it. We are ready to support you as much as we can in this process. Again, the estimation, reduction, and eventually compensation of emissions is an intermediate step to get to the global climate neutral or net zero society that we need by 2050. So every little contribution that we can make counts. Right now, we understand avoiding emissions from all sources is almost impossible, or actually completely impossible. And we need the whole of society to transform, to develop new technologies and new solutions so that we can really achieve zero emissions in the future, zero net emissions in the future. But in the meantime, it's key that we try to reduce them as much as we can. So anything that you can do in the schools, and of course all the awareness raising with the pupils and their families and the whole community is of course a very important contribution. So we will support you in that as much as we can, and we hope that Wales is the first to achieve the 100 carbon neutral schools. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Miguel. Yeah, just to reinforce that, my email went across the bottom there, so do get in touch if you want any more information or any clarification. This link will also be going out, so you can watch this session again and pause it in the bits that you want to take a bit more notice of. So we will be sharing that across our communication network as well. And yeah, we would love it if we could be the first to get to the 100 schools. So people out there watching, do get in touch, and we'll take part in that competition and see if we can get to the 100 schools first. And then finally, it's just to pass on our sincere thanks to all our contributors this afternoon. So thanks to our head teachers taking time out to join us, and thanks to Miguel and Fernanda for joining us and sharing your expertise. And we look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.